So, Brian and Stewie, as voted on from you guys in the community, let's begin. Unlike many Family Guy episodes, we have this one start off with a different intro. It's actually a silent intro, all you have is the logo and it dives straight into the episode. Pretty much this entire episode is set within this safe here, where only the characters you'd see are Brian and Stewie as the episode's name would lead you to believe. Now there isn't that many one-on-one relationships that go as far as Brian and Stewie. The only one you can maybe debate is Peter and Brian. Should also note that Seth MacFarlane, creator of the show, voices Stewie, Brian, as well as Peter, fun fact, so really he's having this entire conversation with himself. We start off in the middle of a conversation as Brian puts away money for Christmas. It revolves around Stewie wanting to return a sweater. It's also interesting to note that Stewie and Brian in the beginning of the episode appear to view each other in a very surface level way, not thinking the other person has specific interests, preferences, and ways of doing things that the other person wouldn't see any value in. It's a very normal thing, as there's only a small section of people who practice that mindfulness that actually see the purpose in everyone else's perspective. Like how Stewie doesn't see the need for Brian to have a safety deposit box in the first place. He's just a dog. Bury your stuff in the yard. Not seeing him at all as a living person who may actually want to give things the proper care.
And if I want to return this sweater, we've got to get to Wyndham's by 6:30. 6:30? Yes, you have to return it within a fortnight for a refund.
Remember the floss, kids. I do enjoy the opening banter because on the surface, it's just two friends going at it, but there's a clear dissonance between the two today that neither of them want to acknowledge, which is always tough to see, let alone deal with. That lack of mindfulness from Stewie and Brian is returned when Brian calls Stewie an idiot for getting a $3,000 sweater. Now, I want to say, you see all of the items they use in the story. Not a single item is there just to be there. Each has a purpose, from the sweater to the Jenny Craig bag to the bottle of alcohol to the book to the bird, even the box and location. A common mistake new writers make is putting a lot of details that if taken out have no real impact on anything. It only serves as clutter, especially in moments like this where the intention is to get you engaged in a touching story. So now that both sides don't really understand where either is coming from, it sets up that initial conflict of Stewie now being really upset at Brian for his lack of reassurance or positive things to say about his financial decision. Now yes, in a vacuum, it would be one thing for me to grandstand and say that a good friend should always say positive things to you and stand behind all of your decisions. But there's hundreds of tiny different things that go into every decision we make. Plus, it is in Brian's nature to not see spending money on luxury things as something to be positive about. You know, unless it leads to him getting with the girl or impressing someone he looks up to. Then, at the height of the issue, the vault door closes and locks, and it will stay that way for the rest of the night. I also want to acknowledge the meta tidbit of the inconsistency of Stewie's character on how, yes, he can make a time machine, but has zero idea how to get out of a safe. Now, of course, when you acknowledge an easily fixable flaw, that makes everyone around you so happy. Oh, did I say happy? I meant going on social media, ranting about every single instance of when Stewie went from being an evil genius that had infant tendencies to now being a soft, feminine, quasi-genius whose hate for Lois is as inconsistent as the amount of actually funny cutaway gags. You know, I get those words confused sometimes. Now, I guess I can't walk around the giant elephant that is, so no one checks the room before it closes? Yes, you can probably nitpick that, I just don't think about it much here. So we get to the first of 3-ish conflicts that happen in here. Note that they're still in a stage where they can care less about what the other one thinks, and are much more caring about their own best interests, like in this case, Stewie needing his diaper to be changed.
All right, fine, I'll take the diaper off. See, you're not you're not really thinking this through. We would still be faced with the problem of the odor. If the poo were to be removed... What is it? What are you driving at? Eat it. I can't even... How would... that's sick. That is sick. How messed up in the head are you that you would even ask? Look, okay. Just calm down, okay? We're just talking. We're not doing anything yet. Eat what's in my diaper, lick the diaper clean, and then put the diaper back on me. There is no way any of that is happening.
I really enjoy how the camera centers in on every action Stewie does trying to explain this. It would be a great task to ask someone to consume your feces. That's not even an easy question to ask. Unfortunately, Family Guy is a largely unexpressive show when it comes to animation in comparison to many other shows. A lot of rigging and predictable moments go into the production of the show. And I'd imagine a more expressive style or possibly anime, it would have done the scene a bit more justice. this. Brian says no, there's just no way I would do this. I would rather shoot myself. And they scramble to get the gun that was apparently in a safety deposit box, calling on Stewie's bluff on actually pulling the trigger to prove that there actually is bullets in the gun. More on this later. Brian reminds Stewie of his phone, which causes Stewie to put the gun down and call for customer service to return the sweater. Yeah, it's that self-interest thinking that really messes things up for the both of them. It's terrible, really, but what makes this great is that it adds shades of gray to the story, and it doesn't make either of them the clear-cut bad guy. There's tons of malice and stubbornness on both ends, and it's a clear case of two characters' temperaments clashing. It also doesn't help that Stewie doesn't immediately go to return the sweater, rather opting to have a conversation with the salesman before Brian takes the phone away, only to realize that the phone has died.
It's dead. You wasted the one phone call we had to return a sweater?
A $3,000 sweater, which I am now stuck with. Oh, this day.
Ah! Ow! You stink! And now I'm trapped in here with you and your stink because you were too stupid to call somebody who could help us!
Really can't do many of these scenes justice, especially because, yes, Stewie was being stubborn, just like Brian was earlier, and honestly none of this pent-up animosity would have surfaced if Brian wouldn't have injected his pessimism about how Stewie spends his own money. This episode is a great example of less is more. You have the bare minimum like I said earlier, but listen to what Stewie is fixated on. He's fixated on the fact that now he won't be able to return the sweater, regardless of the fact that he's locked in a safe. He only understands when Brian gets really angry, and not his usual grumpy attitude. The phone breaking was just icing on the cake. Plus, with this next scene, it really builds sympathy that Stewie, as big of a nuisance as he has been throughout the episode, can't stay in the predicament he's in. The scene was also really needed, and it does show that the two care about each other, but they aren't exactly model citizens, nor do they show the appreciation like you'd think friends would. Brian cracks and decides to help Stewie, but not before making sure at every point, is this 100% needed? Do I really need to consume this? And there's no way around this. Because there isn't any way around this, he does it. And one thing I gotta take a jab at Family Guy for a second, because this double attempt here, that sort of start, stop, start movement, it could not have worked any better if it was calculated by an AI. A lot of people seem to have a problem with this scene itself though because of the obscenity of the situation. So let's look at intent for this. It doesn't show anything happening on screen for the audience. All we get is Stewie gagging and throwing up at the sight. We don't actually see Brian eat poop, nor do we see the remains on his face anywhere. For all we know, he could have swept it off the fourth wall into a staff member as they are on a giant stage, and Stewie could have thrown up on cue. I don't know, like a play. That's just as valid as any other detailed imagery that you can think of. Not only this, but the goal or intent of the scene wasn't for shock value as a talking point or a trending scene that will be heavily discussed in public. The reason for this scene to exist is to show the sacrifices one friend is willing to make for another friend to make them comfortable, even if that means being really uncomfortable for a few moments. Plus, it makes sense within the factors of this scene. Babies poop and dogs eat some weird stuff. Simply put, context matters. Now, if this was Peter and Cleveland for some odd reason, okay, fine, then there'd be something to at least debate. It's also great story-wise to show the reaction Brian has to the experience that he just pushed through. The way his eyes look, him being slouched and sitting in silence, all really make this work out a lot better. They rest for the night as it sinks in that they'll be in here for one more day. This next scene really does make things relatable for a lot of people, I know at least, and possibly some people you may know. The episode shifts into making things more intimate with the duo. Brian gets up to get a drink and offers some to Stewie, who just because of the rush of him consuming alcohol at his age, appears to be the primary reason as to why he accepts. This causes the both of them to take in more than half the bottle, which means exactly what you think. I also want to note that Stewie wants to know why Brian had a bottle in his safety deposit box in the first place, and he blows off the question as nothing important. Foreshadowing. Now, the biggest thing about alcohol that Family Guy loves to portray is that it lowers your inhibitions and gives less anxiety to doing things that you would normally be embarrassed to do or say. So of course, now that their inhibitions are down, they're friends. It also cements the core of why I keep calling them friends. There is a fondness there for both of them under that stubbornness, pessimism, and self-interest blocking out potential positive traits in the friendship. In fact, the fighting, while not the best, isn't really bad when you think about toxicity and other things that can really mess up a relationship relationship. In fact, in many cases, not all, I really want to stress that, the friendships in which it is 100% positive, nothing negative, no fights at all, those are the ones I truly look out for. Also, side note, Stewie's first dance is the best thing I've ever seen, and it should be its own cutout GIF. And yes, I say GIF, because it is GIF. So if you're following the patterns here, Stewie snubs Brian's self-interest, which Brian returns back to him. They fight, Brian makes a huge sacrifice, and now in return, Stewie makes the sacrifice when it comes to his ear. He wants his ear to be pierced, and uses a clearly unfit big needle from his overalls to do so, while they're both drunk. Now to some people, it would be a debate to call this a sacrifice, but if you were to give me an option between having my ear torn open, eating a baby's feces, and doing literally anything else, I would choose to become the #1 most subscribed OG panda on YouTube. Yeah. Let's go, boys. They get into deeper territory when Stewie transitions his question of the dog whisperer to wondering if Brian lives life with a purpose. Obviously, that doesn't go over too well.
Do you really live with purpose?
How dare you tell me that my life doesn't have purpose?
No, that's not what I said. That's what you're saying.
No, don't do that. Don't try to turn my words on me.
You think I care about you? No, you're just smart enough and you're just clever enough to occasionally amuse me. I got you to eat my poop. And you know why I did it?
Yeah, you were afraid you were gonna get sick.
Because I wanted to see if I could.
You're a monster.
No better person on Family Guy should be confronted with that question than Brian. And no, not because he's a dog and dogs live much shorter lives, but for many, many other valid reasons. He's an author's pet, and he's been put into more situations than your average main character on the show, because Brian is a character that's often focused on. Not only that, but like I said earlier, his dilemmas of trying to impress people or get a significant other generally doesn't go too well. So yes, what does that all lead to with Brian? I mean, if he had a purpose, it should be easy to come out with, right? Stewie, on the other hand, I don't believe he'd know what his purpose is at his age. Yes, the same baby who made a time machine. Then they start to tear each other down again, which leads into Stewie giving Brian the gun to shoot him with, which was the exact opposite scene that we've seen earlier, and it accidentally fires off. I also enjoy how they incorporate the dead bird back into this, bringing it up, as well as the chair to intensify this moment. All of this being at the peak of their animosity towards each other. Once that scene dies down, we get the last big scene of the episode, but not before one more argument. Stewie ends up having energy bars. You know, like how we had a phone. And I also appreciate the animators keeping in Stewie's ear the way it is. Normally, it's a toss-up when animators keep certain things in, and this gives it the weight that it needs to act as Stewie's big sacrifice. Brian complains, justifiably in my humble opinion, that Stewie having food this entire time and not saying anything until he was hungry would get anyone annoyed, but he bites his tongue shortly so he can get a bar himself. And I'm going to let the scene play out for the most part before commenting on it because it's very important.
Hey, Bri,
Yeah?
how come you have a gun?
I keep it in case I ever want to commit suicide, okay?
But why, Brian?
You wouldn't understand. You're just a kid.
Well, I could try.
I don't know. Sometimes it's all too much.
What is?
Life, everything. Just having the gun here, knowing there's a way out, it helps. Dogs are supposed to be able to instinctively live with purpose, not even to have to think about it, just born like that. But I wasn't. You know, I've tried to find meaning in my life, and I just can't.
You know, it's insane to think about telling a toddler that, but because Stewie is personified to be able to handle deeper topics, the scene actually works together really well. I also think the scene handled the tact and the respect it needed to have. It did not come across hokey or desperate for emotions. They said it and they moved on like how some people may do. Also, for Brian to tell Stewie, and only Stewie that, should tell you a lot about how they feel about each other. Stewie would go on to say that Brian's purpose is that he gives Stewie purpose. And I can see that being a sour point with many people, but that's a giant moral issue that I don't even want to think about unwrapping. Point is, after all of the fighting, and after all of the things they said that they don't mean, they finally come together to show how they really feel about each other. And that's why many people enjoy this episode. I wouldn't want this episode all the time. I wouldn't even want an episode like this in every season, because then it would turn the show as a whole into something that it's not. But there's something about being locked up in a confined space, not being able to distract your mind with anything else, and having to speak with someone who at this point you haven't really done anything with on a deeper level. And it turned this into a spectacular episode. This could have played out horribly with both characters just being crabby towards each other and basically making each other's lives worse, only to shoe in some emotional garbage at the end that wouldn't have even made sense story-wise. This was not that. This actually had a progression, it had reasons for everything everything happening. They went through an entire spectrum of emotions all throughout these 22 minutes, and it really shows. Plus, Brian always had a self-destructive streak. It's just, it hasn't been acknowledged for the most part. And it goes into many decisions that he makes, not counting the first few seasons. I don't know if this was his true intentions as a character shining through, or the result of the eventual flanderization that fell into place. Either way, it makes sense. I also want to center in on Stewie's reply saying that he can try to understand. That's really the best thing you can do in a lot of situations that's even remotely like this. Just try to understand, even if you don't at first. It's such an underpriced, rare thing nowadays. And again, it goes back into that mindfulness that was surely lacking in the beginning of the episode. But going back to the purpose conversation, the reason I don't have trouble with Stewie saying that Brian's purpose is that he gives Stewie purpose is because Brian was okay with it. Stewie gave his reasons and they seemed valid enough. No music at the end, just like how there was no music at the beginning and the episode ends there. And that was Brian and Stewie. Honestly, one of my, if not my favorite Family Guy episode. I heard it got mixed reviews and that's completely fair, but I don't see much wrong with it. The change of pace was great and any scene that was raunchy had a clear defined purpose to be there. And this honestly couldn't have been with any other characters. Honestly, if you haven't seen this at all or even in a while, you should take a look at it again. Anyways, let me know what you think in the comments down below. As always, special thanks to the patrons of December, and until next time, try to understand. Alpha out.